Hi, everyone, and Happy New Year. 2021 is with us. Today, as we kick off our 21 live chat series with a special Q&A with Diana Rodgers, our author and documentary filmmaker of Sacred Cow. You know this film, or you should know this film, that explores how industrial agriculture and the processed food industry have impacted the environment, our health, our perception of raising livestock and eating meat. So please have an opportunity, if you have an opportunity to watch the movie, please do so. We have a unique link that's available until January 17th. It's here in the chat box, and the film is also available for streaming on a number of networks listed in the chat. Now, you may recall that I talked to Diana over the summer on the book, and I've been really looking forward to talking about the Sacred Cow documentary, which I think is absolutely superbly directed and organized with some amazing characters and personalities involved in this process. One of the questions I have for Diana has to do with what's the prioritization of what we should be doing, because there are 4 or 5 key component aspects of the work that she's been doing, and as an executive, I say, well, where do we begin? What's the sharp end of the stick that we can begin to work with? So that's my question, Diana. Hi, and how do we get started to make the change that really is important for all of us?
Well, I think, as a dietitian and a clinician, right, and a mother who deeply cares about malnourished children and the health and welfare of humans, I would love to say nutrition. Let's get people fed nutrient-dense food. But we've got such a bias against meat coming from so many different angles, from really powerful organizations. And because so many academics have hung their hat on observational research, which can't prove cause, but the media likes to report it that way. You know, meat must cause cancer when they compare vegetarians to meat eaters. A typical vegetarian, of course, is much more likely to shop at a health food store and eat fresh foods and meditate and all these other things. But of course, it must be the meat that a standard American, that's the big difference. So anyhow, we've got a long way to go, I think, in the health field with acknowledging the important role that animal source foods have for especially undernourished people, but also in America with obese yet malnourished people. With a high intake of ultra processed foods. So putting that aside, I actually think that the easiest argument for us to win is the ecological benefit that conservation style grazing has on especially brittle environments. And so trying to get more regenerative grazing on public lands, better utilizing the grazing lands that we're currently grazing. We've got the Audubon Society has a bird-friendly beef program. I mean, that's massive. They've recognized that the number one cause of the bird populations declining is our loss of habitat through modern industrial agriculture, monocrop agriculture. And so if we can just get more ranching on, more regenerative ranching on these lands, we can actually bring back bird populations, which is one of the unique aspects to the farm in Chihuahua that we filmed at in the movie Sacred Cow. He is working with several different bird organizations and has seen the return of many endangered species of birds coming back, just because through the ranching that he's doing, he's actually, now they've got the native grasses and the perfect habitat for these migratory birds that are losing their food and the proper habitat for them.
Yeah, that segment of the movie is just absolutely inspiring and wonderful. The images of the places where there's been no care and no regeneration, and the erosion there is just startling. And then you go over to the place where they've been working the land properly, and how prosperous it is. I mean that in an ecological sense. The grasses are tall and varied, and the animal, it's amazing. Mm.
Yeah, and there's so many places that I know Heifer works with across the world where the landscape is like that, and so that's why
Yeah.
it's what you guys are doing is so important. And you had briefly mentioned Alan Savory's ranch in
Right.
Zimbabwe. There's just so many places that have desertified that we can totally bring back just with properly managed grazing animals.
Right. So let's keep on the subject, because Alan Savory and you know, make a very strong case that there are millions, if not hundreds of millions of acres that could be regenerated. And of course, the carbon sequestration opportunity of that is enormous, just absolutely enormous. So where can an organization like Heifer and the people listening to this podcast say, okay, this is how you get the stuff started? You know, none of us can afford, you know, to buy 10,000 acres and regenerate it. Or maybe a few of us have it. If you do, do it. If you can, go buy some land and go regenerate. But what would your recommendation be? Because I agree with you. I think the ecological shift, given climate change and its increasing severity, is going to be a motivator to do this.
Well, I think that the conversation has gravitated more a little too heavily towards carbon emissions and farting cows destroying the world. And I
Right.
think that's partly because the plant-based industry, that's really all they have to hang their hat on is emissions, right? The
Yeah.
monocrop agriculture, which is what Beyond Burger and Impossible Foods and these lab-grown meats are all going to all rely on. There's nothing organic about it. There's nothing building soil health, improving ecosystem function, improving the water holding capacity of the soil. So the only thing they have to say is that they have less carbon emissions. So so yes, cattle can help sequester carbon, but also even if we are to just look at the emissions from cattle, just what they're burping out as part of their biological breakdown of the fiber that they're eating, it's part of a biogenic cycle, which is very different than fossil fuels, which is what's going into the production of all these fake plant-based meats.
Yeah.
And so if we're to take a more holistic approach to it, which is actually Alan Savory's whole worldview, and look at, what are we doing? And I know Heifer's involved in this too. How are we improving the nutritional status of these people through the animal source foods? How are we going to improve their financial success? Cropping is hugely problematic in so many places because one storm can wipe out your whole year of
it can. It does.
prosperity. But these walking larders of savings banks, right? Of a goat or a cow,
Absolutely.
of course, as heifers. So I think that you've done a lot to raise the awareness of the importance of animals in much more than just food to many people in the world, especially people living in poverty.
Yeah, I think this whole view of biogenic cycle, what I call the carbon life cycle. We do a lot of analysis of what they call it, life cycle analysis.
Yes.
We could do carbon, life cycle analysis.
Yes.
And explain that to the audience. I think this is so important because everybody sees a cow like it's a truck. It's not a truck.
Right. So, well, there's two different. So first of all, a biogenic carbon cycle is much different than the fossil fuel cycle. So if you were to picture, those little earth spheres that you can get through like museum stores, sometimes they,
you shake
like the water and the little shrimp, and you're not supposed to shake it.
I know.
You're creating a horrible earthquake for all the little creatures in there. But if you were to picture fossil fuels, right, that are pulling up ancient carbon and methane from the Earth's core and pumping it into the atmosphere, that would be like me taking a straw and blowing methane directly into one of these little spheres, right? Where with cattle and other grazing animals that emit methane, they're just recycling molecules that are already part of our atmospheric carbon numbers, right? So cattle are eating grass, which is carbon. They take it in, and other grazing animals are doing this too. Moose do this, and And the bacteria, as part of the digestion, emits methane. The methane goes into the atmosphere, and after 10 years, it turns into water molecules, H2O, which becomes part of the water cycle. So you imagine that sphere, it's kind of just coming back down as rain and adding to our rivers and streams and clouds. And then we've got CO2, and CO2 is being then taken up by the plants. They emit oxygen, O2, which is what we breathe and what many things need to breathe. And then those carbon, the C, is being taken up. Some of it becomes the grass, some of it goes into the roots to become the roots. And then some of it gets leaked down and fed to the microorganisms and fungal networks underground. In exchange for that, those sugars, the carbon, these fungal networks are then going down, mining minerals from rocks and feeding it to the plant. It's a symbiotic relationship going on underground. Some of this carbon then, up to about 40%, gets sequestered in the ground as part of this biogenic cycle. Then the cow eats the grass again, and it all starts. So again, it's not introducing new molecules. You can't make something out of nothing, but you can be pumping it up. And so in the case of transportation, industry, everything to do with consumerism, all the junk that Americans are buying that's, made all over the world, that's all petroleum based, largely from ancient fossil fuels that are introducing new carbon and methane molecules into our atmosphere. And that is the big difference between biogenic carbon from cattle and the fossil fuels. And we don't have more methane burping beings in North America than we did before we got rid of all the bison. So we don't have a net increase in methane. We just have gotten rid of the bison, but we can actually perform the same ecosystem function that the bison did with properly managed cattle. So the bison actually built the Great Plains through their grazing and their pooping. We can actually restore much of the degraded land all over the world with grazing and pooping cattle.
It's fascinating to me. I think for those of us who have a little bit of biological or biochemistry understanding, you've got two incredible miracles here, right? You've got the miracle of photosynthesis, which I remember when I used to study that back in college. I said, it's just amazing. You get photons and chlorophyll and everything else, and suddenly you've got carbon molecules, you've got proteins, etc. And then you've got a similar phenomenon in the gut of the cows or ruminants, where you've got this process that converts indigestible food, well, for us, human indigestible, into food that converts it into protein and minerals and everything else. These two things are working together in this biogenic cycle. To me, I don't mean miracle in the religious sense. I mean just incredible science and nature at work,
Right. And I mean, when you look at it, all of our energy comes from the sun and has to be transformed.
Yeah.
And so if we can do that in a nearly direct process through photosynthesis and grazing animals that can graze on land we can't crop and turn it into the most important food for humans, how can that be replaced by then fossil fuel inputs, chemical agriculture, and factories and transport? So that leads me actually to the life cycle analysis question that you had. So there's different ways of accounting, and the Meatless Mondays program and other organizations that have said, well, cattle emit more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. So that actually came out initially in a report by the FAO.
I remember that.
But
Livestock Long Shadow, or what it was called, yeah.
Yes, where it showed that cattle emit 14.5% of the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, and transportation is 14%. Therefore, cattle are worse than cars. But what came out is that they were actually using a life cycle assessment number for cattle. So the feed, the transport, the processing, get everything involved in getting the animal to your plate, the whole life cycle. But for transportation, we don't even have those numbers. And so what they did for transportation is just look at tailpipe emissions from cars. things like that, but they didn't account for the mining of the metal, of the transport of all these products to the factory, of then shipping all these vehicles all around the world. So, so if you were to just look at the emissions from cattle and compare it to the emissions from transportation, transportation way outnumbers farting cows.
Right.
And so, and again, then we have the biogenic
Cycle.
emissions versus,
Right.
so when you take those
Right.
two things into account, it is a false, you know, who benefits from the argument being skewed like this? The fossil fuel industry, the plant-based meat processing industry, which has huge profits to make from telling people that the carbon footprint of their Beyond Burger is lower than beef.
So do you think there is, I'm thinking about marketing here in terms of marketing this idea. So that's my background.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there is an opportunity of presenting the carbon that's sequestered through this regenerative agriculture, like the farmer, I forget what his name is, in Chihuahua?
Alejandro.
Yeah, Alejandro. So Alejandro is actually sequestering a lot of carbon, right? I mean, net at the end of the day,
He's
after
building
everything he
soil.
does, he's
Mhm.
building soil. So is this an argument where we could actually refine and simplify the point of view that says there is an opportunity of sequestering X millions of tons of carbon if we do this, because that we're going to be faced with that dilemma, right? If we don't start sequestering, we're cooked.
Yes. And at the same time, if we don't provide habitat for bees and other pollinators and birds, we're also cooked, right?
Yeah, we're starving, actually.
Yes. Starving and have no water because the soil can't hold the water. So there has been one study that was done at White Oak Pastures. Actually, I just got back from there in Georgia.
Right there in Georgia, right here. Yeah, I've been there.
I sent Will, my son, to go work.
Did you really?
Yeah. Off. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was just there like a couple weeks ago, and what they're doing there is incredible. But there was a study showing that, he did have a net carbon gain from his beef production, and you actually had to eat it was something like you had to eat one grass-fed beef burger from White Oak in order to offset your emissions from any Beyond Burger or Impossible Burger. Like it was that much different. But the problem with these measurements is then, number one, we're being reductionist by only looking at carbon sequestration and not total ecosystem function, right? So we're not taking into account, the impact industrial agriculture has on our rivers and streams, on pollinator health, on water holding capacity and flooding and things like that, which are really, really important. So we need to look at the whole system and not just carbon. And actually Savor Institute is doing this through their EOV program, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So they don't look at just carbon. They actually measure how quickly does the water get absorbed by the soil, how over time, how many different plants, species are growing in one given area over several years of time. So they're looking at multiple different leading and lagging indicators of ecosystem function, not just carbon. And the other problem is we can't look at Chihuahua and Bluffton, Georgia in the same context because they're completely different. What's going to happen in Georgia with their rate of carbon capturing is going to be different than what happened. And so in order to study these things, people have tried to replicate Alan Savory's work, but what you can do in Vermont versus Nevada are two completely, you can't replicate it because it's not a perfect scientific experiment. It needs to be adaptive and holistically viewed. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about, again, the work that we could do. We're going to have a new administration, I think, on the 20th, and we've got a new USDA commissioner. We've got, where do we go politically? In terms of gentle advocacy, not nothing violent. Maybe we should get a whole herd of cows and just go down Pennsylvania Avenue. But where do we go? Where's the sensitive spot? The openness spot, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can approach this. And I think that there have been many groups that have tried to change the dietary guidelines, and that's a long, hard road to change, as far as recognizing that animal source foods are much more important. I mean, the charge of the USDA is to promote commodity agriculture, and ironically, they're the ones telling us what's the healthiest foods to eat. So it's a very corrupt organization that is sponsored by industry. And so where else might we wedge ourselves in a little bit to make a change? And I think it could be through the Department of Natural Resources and public lands, and trying to get more regenerative grazing onto public lands, which I think I mentioned to you right before we got on the call. I am going to be working with on a committee to try to get this pushed through. And then I think there's other opportunities with CRP land and trying to open that up for grazing. So currently we're paying farmers not to utilize, to lay fallow certain land. We could be grazing that. To teaching other ranchers in the West, they want to be called ranchers. In the East, farmers and ranchers are kind of an interchangeable term. But just letting them know that that just allowing their animals to graze the entire range for the whole season is less efficient for them financially. I mean, really letting these ranchers know that financially they could actually improve the carrying capacity of their land by more intensively grazing and moving them more frequently. And I know the Savory Institute works with them. Ranching for Profit is another organization that helps farmers by just saying, oh, just try this one section of your land. You don't have to convert everything, but you could actually make more money by using this, what might seem like slightly more intensive management on your end, but will actually yield better results for you in the long run.
Yeah. So I know I'm talking to a nutritionist, and we're talking about ecology, but maybe that's the way to go. What do you think about the carbon market? The idea that we could price carbon, and suddenly, ranchers and farmers are struggling financially and have been, and that would be potentially a major source of revenue, right?
Yeah, I think it would be. It's right now, I think it's a little tricky to measure it. And we don't really have very good standards right now, so it's a little hard, but I think it's an amazing opportunity. Another thing I saw at Will's farm, and I know other people are doing right now, is solar grazing. So where there's a large solar array of solar panels for energy, you can actually graze sheep underneath. There's no one currently grazing cattle because the solar panels need to be at a low height, and cattle are way rougher when they go to rub up against the poles of holding the solar panels up. But certainly with sheep, it's being done all over the Northeast. And I saw a massive field where, farmers actually can get paid to produce protein while they're keeping the grass trim for the solar panels to be the most effective.
Oh, I see. Like mowers, like
mowers, right? Yeah. Because one of the biggest expenses with these solar companies is actually just keeping the weeds down so that they're not interfering with the, light penetration. And so they could either spray it with glyphosate or weed killer, or they could pay farmers to manage that for them while they're producing protein. So I'd love to see, solar lamb as a branded product that I could buy.
Solar lamb, I like it.
Grocery store, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I was thinking about the issue you raised about how difficult it is to measure the carbon sequestration. It does take time. We're busy. We're trying to find people who've got, some kind of technology that allows it to be done cheaply. Because the problem is, if you're going to start sampling even small farm, or especially small farms, on the quality of their soil, you end up paying, $150 for an analysis, and you got to keep repeating that. That's just not affordable.
Yeah, so and it's not just one point. It's like all over.
Exactly. You got to keep sampling. So I'm looking for a $1 test. And if anybody's listening to that and has got a $1 test, let us know. We'll buy a lot of those. because we've got 1 million farmers, and they on the average may have 4 or 5 acres. That's a lot of acreage, and we would love to have the revenue or they would love to have the revenue for the carbon they sequester through all the techniques, the biogenic techniques that we're teaching them.
Yes, Steve Applebaum, who is, he's affiliated with Harvard, but he's also working with a rancher out in Montana. I know he's working on that, and we did a podcast with him. So he's one person maybe I could make an introduction to.
Yeah, that would be great. Please do. Yeah. Yeah, we're working with, we're looking at a very affordable system out of Holland. As usual, the Dutch are there. But I think that's one of the barriers there. I think if we can solve the measurement problem, then I think we've got an opportunity of supplying the carbon or the sequestered the carbon. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so who within the, I know you've been involved with the federal government now a little bit. Who do you think within the government might be interested in the carbon market from a farming point of view, right?
I mean, I really see this as a bipartisan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I've spoken with people on all sides of the political spectrum that can get behind this, because it only benefits everybody. It benefits rural America. I mean, we've seen just the devastation of rural towns because of lack of farming jobs. We need to bring that back. It's another really great thing that's happening at White Oak. He's employing so many people. I mean, there's no reason to live in a rural town if you're not called there for a specific purpose, which would be agriculture or largely agriculture anyway. I mean, there's other reasons, but so if we can, provide farmers with meaningful jobs that actually pay a living wage, through however we can do it, through carbon farming, through carbon credits,
carbon farming
that Republicans and Democrats and everybody can get behind.
Yeah, I think you're right. So there's a lot of hope there, and how to get involved. We think about it at Heifer in terms of how to get engaged in a way that is still, within true to our mission of ending poverty and hunger and everything else. And so I always think about carbon sequestration as a market that the farm, as I said, they carbon farming, and they could be selling that to the right audiences at a good price.
I almost wonder too if there could be credits for increasing pollinators or increasing bird populations or something like that. Like maybe, because there's, again, I just worry that if we only talk about carbon, it's reducing the complexity and the beauty of the whole system down to molecules when, like when the organic market started, it was really regenerative farming, but then as larger organizations co-opted that term, they were able to sort of like monochemical crop organically, and so I almost wonder if the, carbon, it could just be, the minimum just to show the sequestration of the carbon, but yet all the other systems that are happening on the farm in Chihuahua or these other places
might still destructive. Still destructive.
I mean, I've been to conferences and I've seen like regenerative goji berries imported from I don't even know where, but they're supposedly carbon neutral goji berries or something, and I'm like, wow, that's just not the point of regenerative agriculture.
No, the profit motive is going to find a way to corrupted in some way, right? I think that's I think your story here, and I think you're right. Wow. Well, I think we've come to the end of our half hour, Diane, as usual. I could go on for hours here. The next time you come to Georgia, you're going to come visit me because I live close to Atlanta.
Oh, you do?
I do. I live in a little community called Serenbe, which is actually a biogenic community. So I think we would love to show you around on how we try to live in concert with nature in our homes. Are too large, but never mind.
Well, I'd love to see it. That would be really cool. We flew in and out of Atlanta.
Yeah, sure. We're about 20 minutes away from the airport. So
okay.
Okay. So thank you very much. And let me just say that I'll be back on January 27th. And we'll be talking to Danielle Nierenberg, whom I suspect you know. You must know Danielle. Do you know Danielle?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And she's working hard at trying to find a new system, a new food system through her organization called Food Tank. So we're all working towards the same end in one way or the other. So
Right.
Diana, thank you very much. Everybody go watch the movie. It's really well done. Congratulations on a beautifully organized and compelling documentary. It really was. And the people you featured there are so sympathetic and just lovable, just simply lovable. And
Thank you.
so, all right.
All right. Have
Thanks
a great
again.
day. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Diana. Bye-bye.